This video may contain offensive language or be frightening to some viewers. Viewer discretion is recommended. After waking up with a jolt, the girl laid in bed a few seconds longer, reaching over to switch on her bedside lamp. She tried to remember exactly what had stolen her sweet slumber away. When she couldn't, the brunette swung her legs over the side of the bed and heaved herself up. Checking the time on her phone, she snorted when she saw it was midnight, the witching hour. Knowing that sleep would only evade her, she left her room for the kitchen, a good cup of coffee on her mind. As she passed her front door, a chill spread like liquid down her spine. It's only winter, she told herself, focusing again on the coffee plan, measuring out scoops, water, and preparing her cup kept her occupied. But as the dark liquid boiled, she had nothing left to keep her mind from wandering off. The chill returned, and she couldn't help but glance behind her to the front door. It stood there, innocently enough, just like always. The dead bolt was still in place, and she could see nothing amiss with it. Turning back to her coffee, she did her best to forget about the feeling. With her cup in hand, she started back towards her bedroom. As she walked by the front door, she decided that a quick glance out the peephole would help calm her restless mind. The chill worsened with each step she took towards the door and further away from the safety and warmth of her blankets. She pressed her empty hand against the cold metal door and took a deep breath before leading her eye to the peephole. At first, she could only see an inky blackness that somehow seemed to swirl in itself. When she blinked in surprise, the void melted away. She wished it hadn't. In its place, there stood what she could only guess was once a man. The limbs were long and inhumanely awkward, with bulky joints branching off into several arms, not unlike the branches of a tree. The creature was draped in a black suit, somehow making the thing more nightmarish to her. The icing on the proverbial cake, however, was what passed as the hellish thing's face. It was as though her mind blurred the ghastly visage to spare itself further shock and horror. She shoved herself away from the door, with the hand still pressed against it. The scalding mug of coffee fell, the liquid burning her bare legs as she fell backwards and tried to crawl away from the door. She knew, somehow, that her mind hadn't been playing tricks on her. As she crab-walked away from the door, she watched as tendrils as black as the void she first saw snake around through the cracks. The girl was trapped between the instinct to flee and the gut feeling to not turn her back on the door. When the door jolted, the urge to flee overcame her, and she slipped in the burning liquid as she tried to make it back to her room. She knew deep down that she was trapping herself in a corner, but she had to get away from the door. The girl was halfway down the hallway when she heard the previously locked door creak open. She screamed and slipped into a wall, cracking her chin on it and stunning herself. After that, there was only darkness. Nicole? A warm male voice snapped the woman out of her trance. As she turned around, she was met by one of her sister's doctors. She nodded, not sure if she should say anything, or even if she could find her voice, if she did have anything to say. That morning, she had gotten an urgent phone call from the hospital, saying that her sister Lindsay was there. Before they had even let her see her, the doctors had pulled her off to the side and insisted that they talk to her about what might have happened. Phrases like self-inflicted and assault had been thrown around, and Nicole felt her mind reel. She still hadn't fully understood what they had been saying until she saw Lindsay with her own eyes. Her little sister had a bandage wrapped around her head, covering both of her ears as well as eyes. They said it was to keep her now deadened eyes from drying out, and to try to keep infection out of the wounds Lindsay had made to her ears. The doctors had guessed that either she or someone else had jammed a pencil into them to keep her off balance, or to deafen herself against something. There was a mix of first and second degree burns to her hands, legs, and feet, from what was assumed to be coffee her neighbours had found slipped all over the entry to her apartment. As Nicole walked into her sister's hospital room for the first time, she thought she had seen the silhouette of a man in the window. That, she knew, was impossible. Her sister's room was on the 3rd story of the hospital. It was a tall man, wearing a black suit, with a blank face. This might not qualify as paranormal by most standards, but I wanted to share it. Whatever it was, it definitely wasn't normal. I'm from upstate New York, in a moderately unpopulated area. I have a large wooded area behind my house, which I frequently enjoy hiking through and tending to. Much of the area has been overrun by garlic mustard, a pretty horrible invasive plant that can quickly establish and take over an area in just a few years. So I spend quite a bit of my time there in the warmer months, pulling out as much of it as I can and trying to restore native woodland plants. It's a seemingly endless battle. Anyway, as I worked my way through the woods, I noticed there was a doe standing very close to me, about 25 feet away. She just stood there, staring at me. I called out, "What are you doing?" to her a few times, and clapped my hands to try to get her to run away, as I didn't really like that she was so close and staring at me so intently. It was funny at first, but seemed more and more off the longer she stayed. She just stood there until I finished in the area, and then I drove away on my 4-wheeler. Even the loud engine roar didn't scare her off. I looked back as I drove away, and she was still there, staring me down. About half an hour later, I was pretty far out into my woods, transplanting some things, when I suddenly had the uncomfortable feeling that I was being watched again. I looked around, and just across the small clearing I was standing by, I noticed some kind of weird beige-grey blob. Curious as to what it was, I walked closer. As I approached, it started to make more sense to me. It was what appeared to be a dead doe draped over the crotch of a tree. Something wasn't quite right, though. I struggled to fully understand what it was I was looking at. I could see the ears, I could make out the shape of its head, and I could even see tendons bulging out of its neck. Suddenly it hit me. I was now about 15 feet from it, and I froze as I realized. The deer had no face. There should have been dark spots for the nose and the eyes, and there should have been a mouth of some sort. There was nothing. It was solid, short beige fur. The best way to describe it was the deer version of Slenderman. A totally featureless, smooth, furry face. I panicked, despite that it was a bright, warm, sunny day. I felt like I was surrounded by darkness. Everything seemed quiet and eerie, yet I felt something stirring from around the deer. Though I don't think anything was physically moving, it's hard to describe. Really, it was probably just me panicking. I grabbed my stuff and got out of there as quickly as I could. Luckily, I had the four-wheeler with me, so I had a quick escape. Despite that this thing appeared to be dead, I felt the need to get away from it. Fast. Looking back, I suppose it could have been some kind of weird hunting dummy, or perhaps just a dead deer with an abnormally monotone face, which had collapsed and stuck together. I've been tempted to venture back out there to examine it, but I get the feeling it would either be gone or just a disgusting pile of dead, decaying deer. Neither of which seem to make the hike worthwhile. I'm also still pretty creeped out by it, so I have little motivation to check back in. What do you think? Just an odd occurrence? Or could this be something paranormal? I see his eyes when I close mine. They are hollow, black. They saw me and pierced me. His wet hand. I will not go to sleep. His voice.